Griffin Zanders was trying to keep his 3-year-old daughter from crying over a broken balloon when a woman in heels and a navy blue suit nearly collided with him on the crowded sidewalk. "Sorry, do you have a phone I can borrow?" she asked breathlessly, clutching a tablet to her chest like it was worth more than his car. "Mine just died and I need to call my driver." Griffin blinked. Sure. Just give me a second." He shifted little Maddie on his hip, digging into his worn jeans for the beat-up phone he'd been nursing for the past 5 years. The screen was cracked. The battery barely held a charge, but it still made calls. "You can use it," he said, holding it out cautiously, eyes flicking to her face. She was stunning, sharp, serious features, sleek dark hair pulled into a bun, and a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. She took the phone without hesitation. "Thank you." "I'll just be a second." Her voice was clipped professional. She turned away to dial, frowning at the sky as if even the weather was inconveniencing her. Griffin turned back to Maddie, who sniffled and wiped her nose on his shoulder. "It's okay, Bug," he murmured. "We'll get another balloon next week. Daddy just needs to get paid first." They were standing outside the library, where Griffin had just posted another flyer offering odd jobs. He'd been laid off 5 months ago, and between daycare costs, groceries, and rent, they were barely staying afloat. His life was a constant shuffle of side gigs, babysitting swaps, and praying his car didn't die. The woman handed the phone back after a minute. "Thank you." That was, she paused, looking at the screen. "Your name is Griffin," he nodded, surprised she noticed. "Yeah." "Griffin Zanders, I'm Marlowe Grant." She extended her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Thank you for saving me from a very expensive disaster." Griffin chuckled. "Glad I could help." She cocked her head, eyes flicking to Maddie. "Your daughter." "Yeah, that's Maddie." "Say hi, Bug." Maddie gave a shy wave, thumb still in her mouth. Marlowe's polished expression softened just slightly. "She's adorable. Thanks." Griffin shifted his weight. "You good now? Phone all charged up?" "Not even close." "But my driver's circling the block." She hesitated, then surprised him by saying, "Can I buy you a coffee to say thank you?" He blinked. "Wait, really?" She nodded. "There's a cafe around the corner. You helped me, I'd like to return the favor." Griffin opened his mouth to decline. He had no business saying yes to a woman who looked like she stepped out of a Manhattan boardroom. But Maddie clapped her hands and whispered, "Cake, Daddy." He sighed and smiled. "All right, but only if they have chocolate." The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon. Marlowe ordered a latte and, without asking, paid for a hot chocolate and a tiny chocolate cupcake for Maddie. Griffin sat across from her, watching as Maddie devoured the treat like she hadn't eaten in days. He felt weirdly exposed, like she could see how tired he was. How much he was trying to hold it all together. "So," Marlowe said, stirring her drink. "What do you do, Griffin?" He scratched his jaw, suddenly self-conscious. "Used to be in construction management. Layoffs hit last winter. Been doing whatever I can since. Fixing fences, painting houses. Anything that pays." Marlowe's expression didn't change. No pity, no judgment, just curiosity. "That's honest work." "I try," he said. "Maddie's got daycare 3 mornings a week, so I cram in as much as I can." There was a silence, not awkward, just thoughtful. Marlowe glanced at Maddie, who was now humming to herself and licking frosting off her fingers. "I'm in finance," she said. "Mergers and acquisitions. Sounds intense." She smiled for the first time. It changed her whole face. "It is. I live in meetings and spreadsheets." "It's not exactly chocolate cupcakes and sidewalk balloons." Griffin laughed. "Yeah, I figured. You looked like you were about to sprint to Wall Street when you borrowed my phone. To be fair, I was." She sipped her latte. "But the meeting got pushed, so now I'm here." "With you?" He looked at her, surprised again by how matter-of-fact she was. "You always make pit stops for random dads with cracked phones?" he asked. "Only the ones who save me from being stranded on 5th Avenue." They talked for almost an hour. Marlowe asked questions, real ones. About his work, his daughter, his dreams. Griffin found himself answering without holding back. Maybe because she didn't look away when he talked about struggling. Maybe because she listened like she actually cared. Maddie eventually fell asleep in his arms, her frosting-smeared face pressed against his chest. "I should go," he said quietly. "Daycare pickups at 3 tomorrow, and I've got a deck to repair in the morning." Marlowe nodded and stood with him. "Griffin," she said as they walked outside, "this might sound strange, but I'd like to see you again." He blinked. "Wait, what?" She smiled again, softer this time. "You're real, honest, and I like that. If you're interested, I'd love to take you to dinner, something." "Less frosting covered," he laughed, stunned. "You want to take me to dinner?" "Yes, unless you'd prefer to take me." He looked down at Maddie, then back at her. "I can't afford the places you probably eat at. Then I'll pick the place and you just show up." Her tone was gentle but firm. Griffin hesitated. Every part of him screamed this wasn't his world, but something about her calm, her confidence, the way she'd looked at Maddie made him want to say yes. "Okay," he said finally. "Dinner sounds good." Marlowe reached into her bag and handed him a business card. "No phone numbers, just an address and a time. Saturday, 7, I'll be waiting." Then she walked away, heels clicking, leaving Griffin on the sidewalk with a sleeping daughter, a chocolate-smeared backpack, and a heart pounding louder than it had in years. He looked down at the card, dinner. With her, he never could have guessed that letting a businesswoman borrow his phone would lead to anything, but something told him his life had just changed. Griffin adjusted the itchy collar of the only decent button-down he owned. As he stared at the reflected version of himself in the fingerprint-smeared window of the subway car. He had managed to borrow a blazer from his neighbor, an elderly man who once worked in insurance and still believed a man should own at least one good jacket, even if he had nowhere to wear it. Maddie was spending the night at his sister Riley's apartment across town, bribed with the promise of popcorn and her favorite movie. He clutched the business card Marlowe had given him like it might vanish if he let go. She hadn't given him a phone number, just an address in Midtown and a time. 7. He was early because if there was one thing Griffin understood about people like her, it was that being late wasn't an option. The restaurant sat at the top of a building so tall he had to crane his neck to see the rooftop. The doorman didn't even blink when Griffin stepped up. He simply opened the door and gestured him inside like he belonged there. The elevator walls were lined with velvet. When the doors opened, Griffin stepped into a space so golden and quiet he instinctively lowered his voice when he gave his name. A hostess guided him across the room, past tables lit by low candles, past couples who looked like they belonged on magazine covers, until they reached a corner table with a view of the skyline that made his chest tighten. Marlowe was already seated. She wore a gray dress with clean lines that reminded him of the way she carried herself, precise, unfazed, like she was always 2 moves ahead. Her hair was down now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked up from her menu and gave a small nod. "I wasn't sure you'd show." "I wasn't sure I should," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "But here I am." "I'm glad," she said simply. Then, after a pause, "You clean up better than I expected. Borrowed jacket." "Don't get used to it. I like that it doesn't fit right." Griffin raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment, an observation." A waiter appeared soundlessly, and before Griffin could even glance at the menu, Marlowe ordered a bottle of wine with a name he couldn't pronounce and 2 appetizers without asking his preference. He didn't mind. It was oddly relaxing, not having to decide everything for once. "You don't like wine," she said as the waiter left. "How do you know? You didn't look at the label. You didn't ask the price. Didn't realize I was being studied." "You are," he leaned back in his chair. "That a habit of yours?" "Studying people. It's part of my job, but with you it's not just that." Griffin folded his arms. "And what exactly are you looking for?" "Contradictions," she said. "You're a man who fixes broken things for a living, but you don't try to fix people. You let things be what they are." He stared at her. "You got all that from one cupcake?" "No. I got that from the way you didn't flinch when I offered to pay for dinner. Would have been proud, not flattered if I had. Would have been disappointed if you tried to prove something." The appetizers arrived, something with truffle oil and paper-thin slices of something else he couldn't name. He took a bite, chewed carefully, and said, "Tastes like someone's idea of a joke." Marlowe let out a short laugh, not mocking, genuine. "You know," he said, "I don't get you. I hear that a lot. You're probably worth more than every apartment on my street combined, and yet you're sitting here with me like this is normal. Maybe this is the most normal thing I've done all week." "Why me?" he asked. I've been surrounded by men in tailored suits and scripted voices for the past 10 years. Not one of them ever looked me in the eye and said what they actually meant. And you think I will? You already did. He went quiet for a moment, watching the lights of the city glitter below them. I'm not trying to impress you, Marlowe. Good, she said. Because that would ruin it. Dinner arrived, perfectly plated dishes he couldn't define but ate anyway. They talked about things that had nothing to do with money or careers. She asked about the time he tried to build a treehouse using only YouTube tutorials. He asked her why she never wore color. She admitted she once stole a book from a library just to see what it felt like. He told her he used to dream of being a pilot, but never flew anywhere farther than Connecticut. He didn't expect her to laugh as loudly as she did when he described crashing his cousin's wedding by accident. He didn't expect her to lean forward the way she did when he talked about the day Maddie was born. And he definitely didn't expect the way her eyes softened when he mentioned how he still kept her first pair of shoes in his nightstand drawer. By the time dessert came a tower of spun sugar he didn't dare touch, Griffin felt something tugging at his chest, something dangerous, something real. I need to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. Is this a game to you? No, then what is it? She looked at him, unwavering. It's a chance. For what? To see if someone real can exist in a world that isn't. He exhaled slowly. You know I can't offer you anything. I'm not asking for anything. I don't live in this world. I don't even understand it. You don't have to, just don't run from it. He looked down at the tablecloth, then up at her again. I'm used to being the one holding everything together. Standing still while everyone else moves past. Maybe it's time someone stood still for you. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. After they left the restaurant, she didn't offer a car, and he didn't ask for one. They walked in silence down the block, the city humming around them. At the corner, she stopped. I have to go, I figured. But I'm not finished with you, Griffin Zanders. He stared at her. Is that a promise? She stepped closer. It's a warning. Then she turned and disappeared into the back of a black car that had been idling across the street. Griffin stood there for a long time, the city blurring around him. He didn't know what this was becoming. But he knew one thing for sure, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Griffin leaned against the back wall of the community center gymnasium, the scent of old varnish and popcorn in the air from the Saturday event. Maddie was across the room, crouched low and focused, trying to balance a beanbag on her head for the toddler relay. He gave a small wave when she looked up, and she beamed, waving so hard she nearly toppled over. He hadn't heard from Marlowe since their dinner. No card, no call, not even a glimpse on the street. He hadn't expected anything else. Not really. But still, he'd caught himself checking the sidewalk outside his building and catching his reflection in windows, wondering if he looked different now. More than once, he'd replayed the last thing she said to him. I'm not finished with you. He didn't know what that meant. Or if it meant anything at all. The gym lights flickered briefly overhead just as the doors swung open. Griffin's chest tightened. She was here. Marlowe walked in like she'd been here 100 times, though she clearly hadn't. Her coat was unbuttoned, her heels exchanged for simple flats, and her hair was pulled into a loose braid that looked almost too casual for her, like someone else had done it. She spotted him immediately and walked straight over. You came, he said, surprised. You said Maddie had an event today, she replied. You didn't say I wasn't invited. I didn't think you'd want to spend your Saturday watching toddlers throw beanbags at each other. She glanced at the chaos sprawling across the gym floor. Honestly, this might be the best thing I've seen all week. Griffin tilted his head. You okay? You look different. I had a board meeting yesterday. One of the partners said I looked too severe. She rolled her eyes. So I let my assistant pick my outfit today. Griffin nodded slowly. She has good taste. You look like someone who laughs. I do laugh, not like that night. Marlowe's eyes flicked to Maddie, who was now dragging a ribbon streamer in a circle with 2 others. She's fearless, she said. Gets it from her mom. Where is she? Griffin's jaw tightened. Not around. There was a beat of silence, as if Marlowe was weighing how far to push. Instead, she glanced at the folding chairs lining the wall. Do we sit? Or is standing part of the parent experience? He motioned to 2 empty seats near the juice table. They sat, the noise of children blurring around them. I didn't disappear, she said after a moment. Work exploded. I flew to Zurich the morning after our dinner. You don't have to explain. I want to. Griffin studied her expression. There was something different beneath the surface, less polished. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. We're closing on a biotech firm and the due diligence is a nightmare. I spent 9 hours yesterday arguing over patent language. He gave a low whistle. That sounds miserable. It was. But I kept thinking about that deck you mentioned last week. He looked at her, confused. You said you had to rebuild someone's deck. I couldn't get it out of my head. How satisfying that must be. To fix something with your hands and know it's done. You want to help me rebuild a deck. I want to understand what makes you feel grounded, she said plainly. Because I've forgotten what that is for me. Griffin leaned back slightly. You're not who I thought you were when we met. I hope not. I thought you'd toss my phone back, get in your car, and forget I existed before the door shut. That would have been easier, she admitted, but I haven't stopped thinking about you, he swallowed. So what are we doing here, Marlowe? She hesitated. I don't know yet, but I don't want to run from it. Maddie came barreling over then, cheeks flushed and clutching a participation ribbon. Daddy, look what I got. Griffin scooped her into his lap. That's amazing, Bug. Marlowe leaned forward. Can I see? Maddie held it out proudly. It's for not falling down. That's a very important skill, Marlowe said seriously. I still haven't mastered it. Maddie giggled and leaned against Griffin's chest. She's pretty, she whispered loudly. Griffin chuckled, meeting Marlowe's gaze. That she is. Marlowe glanced at the clock. Would you two come with me for a bit? I need a break from boardrooms and spreadsheets, and I know a place that serves grilled cheese so well it's almost criminal. Griffin hesitated. I'll pay, she added quickly. I wasn't going to argue, he said, but Maddie doesn't ride in cars unless there's a booster seat. I brought one, he blinked. You, what? I made a guess, she said. I've made a lot of plans in my life. This one felt worth preparing for. They left the gym together, Maddie swinging between their hands as they walked to the car waiting at the curb. The driver stepped out, opening the door without a word. Inside, a booster seat was already buckled in place. Griffin helped Maddie climb in, then slid beside her, stunned into silence for a moment. You don't do anything halfway, do you? He asked. I've never wanted anything halfway, she said. He looked out the window as the city passed by. What happens if this goes somewhere? Then I'll have to learn how to make room for something real. And if it doesn't, then I'll know I tried. Griffin glanced down at Maddie, who was humming quietly, feet kicking the air. I don't let people into her life easily, he said. I don't expect you to, but you're here. I am. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't know what this is yet, but I want to find out. Marlowe's reply came without hesitation. So do I. As the car merged into traffic, Griffin felt something shift inside him like a door opening he hadn't known was locked. He didn't know where they were headed, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of where it might lead. Griffin stood just outside the front door of a brownstone in Carroll Gardens, a paper bag of groceries tucked under one arm and Maddie's tiny hand clasped in his. The stoop was freshly swept, and the iron railing gleamed in the spring sun. He read the brass numbers again. This was the place. Marlowe had asked them to come today. No restaurants, no cafes or chauffeur-driven cars, just an address and her voice saying, "There's something I want to show you." A woman in her 60s with silver curls opened the door before he could knock. You must be the Zanders, she said, smiling warmly. I'm Evelyn, Marlowe's aunt. Griffin shifted his weight. Nice to meet you. She said you'd be here. She's in the garden, Evelyn replied, stepping aside. Go on through. Maddie tugged on his hand excitedly as they passed through the hallway, the smell of lemon polish and old books wrapping around them like a memory. The back door was open, sunlight streaming in. The garden was unexpected. A stone path wound through clusters of tulips and hyacinths, and a small cherry tree bloomed near the back wall, its petals drifting down like soft confetti. Marlowe was kneeling near a raised bed, sleeves rolled up, hands buried in soil. She looked up at the sound of footsteps, brushing dirt from her fingers as she stood. You came, she said, eyes on Maddie. She didn't give me much choice, Griffin replied. She said Miss Marlowe needs help with the plants. Maddie ran forward and flung her arms around Marlowe's waist. You have a tree. I do, Marlowe said, crouching to her level. And I was hoping you'd help me plant some strawberries. Griffin set the groceries down on a nearby bench. Is this your place? Not mine. My late uncle's. He left it to Evelyn, but I've been restoring the garden. It was always the only place in the city he said felt honest. You do this often. I come when I need a break. Or when I forget what real things look like. Griffin took in the new sprigs of green, the slightly crooked trellis supporting a clematis vine, the spade still half buried in a mound of earth. It's beautiful. It's messy, uneven, unpredictable. She dusted her hands off. But it's mine in the ways that matter. Maddie was already digging in the soil with a small trowel Marlowe handed her. You didn't bring us here just to garden, Griffin said quietly, stepping closer. No, I didn't. Her eyes searched his. There was no hesitation now, no guarded edge. I'm walking away from the firm, she said. Griffin stared at her. What? I've already submitted my resignation. They're not happy about it, but they'll survive. He blinked. Why? Because I haven't had a real conversation in a boardroom in over a year. Because I started measuring my value by how many deals I closed instead of how I felt when I woke up. And because I haven't stopped thinking about you and Maddie since the day we met. Griffin exhaled slowly. You're serious. I've never been more. You're giving up everything. I'm choosing something else. That's not the same. He looked at her, really looked, not at the clothes or the posture or the voice that could command a room, but at the person beneath it all. Her hands still smudged with dirt, her eyes softer now, her body leaning forward as if she couldn't bear the distance between them anymore. I don't have much, he said, voice low. I can't offer you penthouses or partnerships. I'm not asking for those. I'm asking if you'll let me build something with you, even if it's messy, even if it's slow. He reached up and gently brushed a petal from her shoulder. You're not the woman I expected, she laughed under her breath. You're not the man I thought I needed. Maddie interrupted them by waving a half-planted strawberry seedling in the air. Can we live here? Griffin crouched beside her. It's not our house, Bug. It could be, Marlowe said softly. He looked up at her, eyebrows raised. I bought the place from Evelyn this morning, she said. She's retiring to Maine. You're serious, he said again. I want you two here, if you want to be. He lifted Maddie into his arms, heart pounding. You're offering us a home. I'm offering you a life with me. If you'll have it. Maddie wrapped her arms around his neck. I want to stay with the tree. Griffin looked at the garden, at the woman who'd walked into his life like a storm and somehow managed to calm everything inside him. Then he looked back at her. Yeah, he said. We'll stay. Marlowe stepped forward, cupped his face, and kissed him not with urgency, but with certainty. The kind that settles deep and lingers. When they pulled back, Maddie clapped, laughing as petals floated around them. Later, they sat on the back steps, Maddie asleep between them, her ribbon still tied around her wrist. Griffin leaned into Marlowe's side, their fingers intertwined. You sure about this? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything. And for the first time in years, Griffin wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. He wasn't calculating what he could afford to lose. He had already found everything worth holding on to, and this was just the beginning. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the brownstone's kitchen as Griffin flipped pancakes. Maddie perched on the counter beside him with her hair tied up in two lopsided pigtails. She was in charge of sprinkling blueberries, and judging by the mess on the floor, she took the responsibility very seriously. You're not supposed to eat them before they hit the batter, Bug, Griffin said, catching her sticky fingers mid-theft. They taste better this way, she replied with the confident wisdom of a 4-year-old. He grinned, slid another pancake onto the growing stack, and handed her the bowl to stir. From the hallway came the soft pad of footsteps. Marlowe stepped into the kitchen barefoot, her robe loosely tied, a mug cradled in her hands. Her hair was tousled from sleep, and there was something startlingly beautiful about her like that. Not poised, not deliberate, just present. I smell blueberries, she said, her voice still low with sleep. You smell mayhem, Griffin replied. Blueberries are just the start. She leaned down and kissed Maddie's head, then kissed him just above the cheekbone, lingering a second longer than she needed to. You guys started without me, she asked, raising an eyebrow. You snooze, you lose, Maddie replied. Marlowe laughed and pulled a stool to the counter, watching them. You two make a good team. We're accepting new members, Griffin said. But the initiation involves syrup and chaos. I think I passed that test the night I let her eat marshmallows before dinner. Maddie raised her hand. That was the best night. Griffin turned off the stove and plated the last pancake. All right, family breakfast time. They all sat at the small kitchen table, the kind with a wobble in one leg and a streak of paint Maddie had added during an unsupervised 5 minutes with markers. The sunlight hit Marlowe's face just so, and Griffin felt something settle in his chest. Something solid. After breakfast, Marlowe stood and stretched, her robe falling open slightly to reveal the edge of the T-shirt she'd stolen from his drawer. She glanced at him as she tied it again. I've been thinking about the firm, she said. About everything I walked away from. He looked up, pausing mid-bite, regretting it. No, but I've been offered something new, something I'd have to build from the ground up. Griffin leaned his elbows on the table. What is it? Private investment group, woman-led. Focused on sustainable development and small businesses. They want me to help shape it. But only if I come in as a partner, not an employee. His eyebrows rose. That's huge. It is, but it's also mine to shape. No more 12-hour days unless I choose them. No more pretending I don't have a life outside a boardroom. He nodded slowly. You think it's the right move? I think it's the first decision I've made in years that feels like it belongs to me. Maddie stood on her chair and threw her arms wide. You're gonna be the boss, Marlowe laughed. That's the idea. Griffin watched her, something warm spreading through him. So what happens now? We build it, she said. The garden, the business, us. He stood and crossed the small space between them, Maddie watching with wide eyes. You sure you want all that chaos? He asked. I'm counting on it, she replied. He kissed her then, slow and certain, with Maddie clapping and yelling, you, in the background. Later that afternoon, as Maddie napped upstairs and the spring breeze drifted through the open window, Marlowe curled against Griffin on the worn couch in the living room. Her head rested on his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns along his arm. I used to think love was something that had to be dramatic, she said softly, like a power play or a negotiation. And now, he asked, his voice just above a whisper, now I think it's pancakes and dirt and falling asleep with your heartbeat in my ear. Griffin kissed her temple. You ever think about what it would have been like if we hadn't met that day? Every now and then, she admitted. And then I remember I would have never known what it feels like to be seen, not for what I present, but for who I am. He tightened his arm around her. You're more than I ever thought I'd find. And you're everything I didn't know I needed. They stayed like that, wrapped in the quiet that only comes when there's nothing left to fear, nothing left to prove. That summer, the garden bloomed wilder than expected. The strawberries grew crooked and sweet. The cherry tree dropped petals like confetti across the stone path. Maddie learned to ride a bike with her training wheels still slightly crooked. Marlowe planted lavender along the fence, and Griffin taught her how to use a hammer without flinching. At night, they'd sit on the back steps with wine and stories, sometimes with friends, sometimes just the two of them. Marlowe's new venture bloomed slowly, but with promise. Griffin took on more projects, even hired a second set of hands for the first time in years. They never needed to define what they were building. It was already written in the walls of the brownstone, the smudged windows, the laughter that echoed off the kitchen tiles. And one evening, after Maddie had fallen asleep curled up on the couch holding her worn stuffed bunny, Griffin took Marlowe's hand and led her into the garden under the soft glow of string lights. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't need to. He just said, I want to grow old with you here. With your hands in the dirt and mine holding yours. She didn't speak. She just nodded, eyes full of quiet tears, and kissed him like there was nothing else in the world worth doing, and that was it. They didn't need a grand ceremony or a crowded room. They had a garden, a child with blueberry-stained cheeks, and the kind of love that didn't require translation. It was enough. It was everything.